My specific understanding or my interest in the Kurdish question began on 16th of September 2022. It was when Mehsa Amini, uh, who was in the Kurdish language known as Jina Amini, she was an Iranian Kurdish woman who was arrested in Tehran for opposing the mandatory hijab, and eventually the subsequent death of her in police custody. And it sparked a series of revolutions, protests in Iran by Iranian women about the mandatory nature of hijab. Now, something which is very interesting, which I found out, that Mehsa Amini was born on 21st of September in 1999 to a Kurdish family of Saqqez in Kurdistan province in northwestern Iran. Mehsa was her legal name, as only Persian names are registered in Iran. Her Kurdish name was Jina or Zina. And I always wondered when, even the idea that Mehsa's legal name was adopted, the birth certificate, all the processes of her identity, she couldn't use her own name. Um, but when she died in the police custody because of the barbarity and so much of revolution and protest, which are still going on, happened in Iran, her Kurdish identity was not given importance. Her Kurdish identity of she wanted to be a doctor. Now, this is very interesting because in India, just recently, a 36-year-old doctor was brutally raped and murdered in West Bengal.
I heard about it, yes.
Yeah. So my question is that I found it very interesting why her Kurdish identity was not mentioned so openly, because a human life is a human life. But in the women protests, there are so many Kurdish women who are also protesting. But that aspect of um, their identity is not openly spoken about. And I found it very asymmetrical in the power balance of understanding identities.
Yeah, one of the different Kurdish society and the rest of the Middle East is the Kurdish woman is much more free.
Yeah.
We dance together, we sit and eat together, And in Iran, before 1979, Ayatollah came to power, there was Kurdish national liberation struggle against Shah regime. And Shah regime was very brutal, very intolerant to the Kurds. And then they end up with Ayatollahs. And Ayatollahs also, because of their theocratic understanding, their ideological understanding of the nation and ummah, they are against Kurds. So woman is also another category for oppression. So women in Iran and other Islamic societies oppressed double for ethnic identity and for being a woman. Now, in 1984, when PKK started the armed struggle, they eventually created the women-only organizations, women-only journalists, women-only diplomats, women-only fighters. And this affected the Kurdish struggle in Iraq. They had women fighters, but it was not well organized like PKK asked for it. And in Iranian Kurdistan too, Komala, as one of the known Kurdish liberation organization in Iran, they had many fighters, but they did not set up separate women organizations. First time, PKK did it. And during the Syrian civil war, when they set up YPG, they also set up a YPJ, women-only Kurdish forces in Syrian Kurdistan fighting against ISIS. And when Mahsa Amini, Jina Amini, brought up her own identity, because woman life freedom was a slogan used by the PKK, and it was known by the Kurdish nation in Iran, Kurdish nation in Turkey, Iraq, and Syria. So they made this slogan popularized in Iran from Tehran to Kermanshah to Urmia to Khorasan, everywhere, that how to say you are opposing the regime, then you say woman, life, and freedom. And because the Ayatollahs set up gender oppression so specific, they have women specifically dealing with the hijab issue. The idea goes back to during the Prophet Muhammad time, when the Arab tribes were fighting amongst each other and they were making women the slaves. So there was shortages of women and there was lots of men, because in every war, lots of men dies and then the woman population become a little bit higher than the men. So they have to come up with a solution. So the woman cover, but you still it's a woman, even though they are in Persian they call chador, or in just the hair cover is called hijab. But there are only eyes visible, full body coverage, burqa. They were imposing this on the woman, but gradually during the Shah time, the Iranian women were very free. They were very westernized. And Ayatollah came as an unhappy power to say they have to stop this. So they made many special laws to oppress women. So being Kurdish is already a problem. Then being a woman and opposing the system, opposing the regime, makes you a very high-level target. So for those police officers, as soon as they find out from her birth identity, government-issued papers, that she's from Kurdish region of Iran. So they become more violent to her. They become more brutal attitude, and it end up killing her. If she was a Persian lady, if she was from Shiraz or somewhere else, I'm not really sure if they will be this much against her. They might even go to her next door right beside her, grab one and cover her by force and let her go. There are so many ways you can treat. But because they find out she was Kurdish, they killed her. And she became a symbol of the resistance.
Yeah.
And she become known with the woman, life, and freedom.
Yeah. Yes. No, that was very thankful. I'm very thankful to you, sir, for explaining it in this detail about specifically the role of women in armed struggle, and that is also very important. Because then there's another analogy that women can't fight. So that is one thing which I'm thankful to you for sharing about how women only wings were created. Now we have two questions. The first question is by Tabassum, and she thanks you for an extremely insightful session. Her question is that what future prospect lie for a state to be formed upon the Kurdish identity? Is it attainable? Is there any reason apart from the separatist forces within Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria that are holding, this discourse? I specifically want to mention the role of US. That how US has had a very complicated relationship with the Kurds. For example, in the first Gulf War in 1991, they established a no-fly zone over the Kurdish regions in northern Iraq, and they helped protect the Kurds from Saddam Hussein. The relationship also deepened in the 2003 Iraq War, where the Kurdish Peshmerga forces served as crucial allies to fight against Saddam Hussein. But in spite of their stronger support base, Kurds have also, in my understanding, been abandoned by the United States.
Yes.
So how do you see that?
Now, USA does not have a foreign policy on Kurds. In 1974, when USA asked Saddam Hussein and Iran directly to both of them for the Gulf of Iran, Persian Gulf or Gulf of Basra, then Iran-Iraq war started. First started in 1977. And Iran, at that time, because were kind of supporting Kurds in Iraq against Saddam.
Yeah.
So Americans kind of supported Shah of Iran to destabilize Iraq. The idea of changing the Middle East to westernized, they were looking for a place like Egypt that looked like the most westernized Middle Eastern state. But then the rest of them are monarchies. So how you can bring capitalistic, industrial, commercial mind to let them upgrade from tribalistic, very religious society to secular, open to Western ideas and living like the Western people. That's maybe also to stop Middle Eastern migration to the Western countries. But the process is at least 100 years behind. Now, for Iraqi Kurdistan, Saddam Hussein used chemical weapons 29 times. In March 1987, they attacked a city with chemical weapons. They killed 5,000 and they wounded around 20,000. In that time, around 1 million Kurds ran away to Iran, 1 million Kurds ran away to Turkey, and they were in refugee camps. This became a big issue. Even I believe was Jimmy
Carter,
one of the American presidents, came to the region with a helicopter and he saw the millions of people on the run. And CNN was showing the Kurdish refugee movements from Iraq to Iran, from Iraq to Turkey, almost 1 hour, 2 hours every day for 2-3 months. Then they said, this is genocide, so we have to do something. Then Americans involved with the Kurds. So they created no-fly zone, Northern Parallel 36 or 38. But Saddam Hussein attacked with helicopters and tanks. It didn't stop there. Like they didn't use the Air Force, but they were still attacking the Kurds. Then Americans said, you know what? We have to recreate Iraq because Iraq is a failed state. But they want to Iraq stay as Iraq. So they try to reform the state structure. But Saddam wasn't agree. And for the financial crisis, he invaded Kuwait. So he will have, more resources. But then it caused another problem. Liberation of Kuwait was against Iraq. So they removed Saddam Hussein. They set up international war crime tribunals for Iraq. And he got death by hanging sentence. And he got killed. But that did not stop Kurds getting autonomy for northern Iraq, totally Kurdish ruled, territorial, provisional, and constitutionally recognized. But then the former Ba'athis with Saddam Hussein, who they were continue being the bureaucrats in the new Iraqi state, they are unhappy. So they were seeking to fight against this. And there was a provisional authority created by Iraq, by Americans. Try to remember the guy's name. And he disbanded Iraqi military. When Iraqi military disbanded, this former Ba'athis, many of them, they become Islamist radicalists. And some of the leadership of former Ba'ath, they become ISIS. And then Syrian Muslim Brotherhood, they become ISIS. They know each other, and they join the forces. So it became Iraq and Syria Islamic State. That's the name. When Americans saw this, they said, okay, then we have to help Iraqi Kurds more. They give them tanks, they give them weaponry, they give them everything. But Iraqi Kurds, they just want to be part of Iraq. They don't want to have united and independent Kurdistan. The most they want, just their parts to be independent Kurdistan. So it's a narrow target or narrow aim that they see in next 10 years, 10, 20 years. This KRG, Kurdistan Regional Government, will evolve and change, and it will be in a position to become an independent state. Now, Kurds are the owners of Kurdistan. We cannot be separatists. The Kurds are living on Kurdistan, on their own land. If Kurds were part of another nation, living on another land, another territory, then they will be separatists. They are claiming not their native land, they claim somebody else's land. But Kurdistan in Iraq is Kurdish land. Kurdistan in Turkey is Kurdistan. We cannot be separatists. We are only fighting for our freedom because we are not recognized as who we are. So Americans' understanding of self-determination after the 1958 decolonization law by the UN, they were created another thing called sovereignty and territorial integrity. You cannot have territorial integrity and sovereignty much more importance than self-determination. Then every self-determination national liberation struggle is fighting against sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's why they call terrorists. That's why they call separatists. But terrorism is acts against civilians. So PKK acting against civilians, killing one. Turkey acting against civilians, killing 40,000. So who's the biggest terrorist here? You have air force and you have chemical weapons. You're bombing Kurdish cities, Kurdish towns, Kurdish forests. PKK or other any Kurdish organization, they don't have chemical weapons. They don't have air force. They don't have tanks. How are they going to commit the same level of crimes? This is one another wrong thing. That's why I was writing a book. Turkish counterterrorism is actually a cover for state terrorism. There is no counterterrorism because Kurds are not doing terrorism. There is no a guy going to a bus and killing everybody in the bus. There is no guy going to a restaurant and killing everybody in the restaurant. Kurds don't do that. Kurds does not believe in that. Kurds never hijack an airplane. Never. There is no, in the Kurdish struggle history, one airplane hijack. But they call Kurds terrorists. This is laughable. Kurds are very legitimate. PKK signed UN conventions on landmines, child soldiers, and harming the civilians. PKK signed international law, armed conflict, called the Geneva Conventions. I have them. And then you call, like, let's say Hamas or PLO. They didn't sign, and they are recognized. Hamas has offices in Qatar and Turkey officially, and PLO has offices in England, France, Germany, and UK, and USA. But Kurds, they don't have. They didn't sign international law agreements, and Kurds signed. PKK signed. PKK also appealed Bill Clinton directly. I have a letter written by Abdullah Öcalan, Kurdish PKK leader, says, we want USA to help Turkey and Kurds to make peace. But Bill Clinton didn't respond. And 2 years later, he put PKK on USA terrorism list. This is not helping 60 million people. Now Americans helping Syrian Kurds fighting against ISIS. But believe me, in a year or two, the Americans will leave Syria. They will leave Kurds alone fighting against Syrian government. If they succeed to get their territory free, then Assad government will make a new constitution, post-war Syria. He will recognize Kurds. If Kurds are not strong enough to defend their territory, they will be crushed again, and everything will go back to original position.